Hello my beautiful puddings, welcome to another Kittie's classroom. This one is part 3 of 4 of the pudding tutorial. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, make sure you go back and watch those. You can get the links for the pattern and a kit in the description below. In this video we're going to learn how to make the head, how to inset the eyes, how to do the eyelids, and how to form the mouth using needle felting and core wool. I'm not going to keep you too long here. Just remember, if you have any questions, to leave a comment below. Let's get cracking. So now we're going to start sewing up their faces. We're going to start with sewing the darts on both the front and the back of the head. And we're going to go in and catch the felt. And you can do a blanket stitch or a ladder stitch if you like, but I'm just going to sew it like this. Make sure you pull it nice and tight, because if you've got any gaps your stuffing will come out. And make sure not to go too close to the edge, because you don't want your seam busting open either. When I get to the end, even though it's pretty much sewn up, I just do a little stitch at the very end of the dart, just to make sure it's held in nice and tight and it's not going to rip downwards any further. And then we just tie it off on the inside, and then you just do the same for all 4 darts, and then we sew the front to the back of the head. I've got my darts all sewn up now, and I've forgotten to mark the top of the back head, but that's fine because we just line the darts up, making sure you've got all your knots on the inside, and line it up on the other side. Pin all our head pieces together. Make sure the chin's lined up. That's an easy one because they're both pointy. Cheeks. Now, because we're making a cat and it's going to have ears, we're going to start just this side of the dart. Well, that's what's easier for me to sew around this way. If you're left-handed, I don't know if it'd be easier to sew the other way. But we're going to start just here so that it encloses the dart, and then we can have our ear on top of it, and it's going to hide the knot there. And then the stuffing can be in here where it's not going to matter too much if it's a tiny bit hollow. But I'm going to sew up the head now, and then we're going to stuff it. So now I've got a gap of about 1.5 inches left. It's time to stuff the head. And I usually stuff the majority of it and then sew the gap up, and then just stuff that little last bit. And you want to stuff your head very firmly. If you don't stuff it firmly enough, you're not going to be able to needle felt the face. It will collapse in on itself. That sounds so ridiculous, but you literally want to get as much stuffing in there as is physically possible. So we're going to really smush it all in there, really getting into the seams, getting into the chin especially. Getting as much stuffing in the head as you can. So if you're buying the kit, when I say use probably more than half of the stuffing the head, I'm not kidding. You literally want to compact it as much as you can. Like, see how there's still squish to it? We don't want that. This is the dog's head, and it's like, that's all my strength. You can't smush it. You don't want any dips at all. There's kind of a little bit of dip here, so I'm using the scissors to push the stuffing down in there, and into all of the seams around the edge. So you can see when I push it, it compresses down. You want to keep doing that until it's as firmly compressed as it can be. I know I keep saying that, but I really can't emphasize it enough. So I've got it all stuffed up so that it's only this part that needs to be filled. I'm going to start to sew the gap up. And then see how it dips down there? That's because it's not stuffed. So really good, and I'm going to use my stuffing tool. Just going to stuff it into that little corner there. This is where you can really feel where it needs to go as well. So you constantly want to be giving it a little squish test, and we'll close it up. And this last little bit, you literally just keep shoving stuff in there until you can't anymore. You can see this last bit up. Go in and up just behind the dots there. Tie our knot off. And then when we put our ears on, it will cover up that knot there. And our head's all stuffed. Now the head's all stuffed, it's time to cut the holes for the eyes. And this bit can be a little bit daunting, but it's alright. We're gonna do it together. I've got my eyes here. If you want these eyes in the kit, I will just label them as blue cat eyes. So we're just gonna kind of place them on, and you might be able to see, it's kind of hard because my hands are covering it, that the hole is actually stretched out a bit and it's bigger than what the eye is. So we're just going to think about where we want the eye. I usually put it up to the top line and to the side line, and there's quite a gap there, and there's usually quite a gap at the bottom. Each one will be different, so that one has more of a gap at the bottom, not that you can really see. And we're actually going to cut not where this is roughly going to be, not on this line, but even smaller, because once you cut the felt and it's allowed to stretch, the hole will be a little bit bigger. So with my little baby scissors, I'm going to go in the center, and I'm going to cut towards this blue line, but maybe like a couple of millimeters away. And if you're worried about this, just start out with your hole really small. I do this all the time, so I know how much my felt stretches. I know how big to make the eye hole. But it's also okay if your hole is a little bit small, because you can just shove your eyes in there. That just sounds so ridiculous. So what we're going to do now is, with our little scissors, we're going to go down into the stuffing, because we've just cut the little felt off. And we're going to go down about 3 mils, and we're just going to do little snips, and we're going to cut like a little reservoir for the eye to sit in, because the eye does have a little bit of a rise to it, and we don't want that sitting on top, because then we're going to have big googly fish eyes. So we're just cutting a little reservoir for it to sit in, and then holding our scissors flat, cutting off that excess stuffing. I'm just going to go in and cut it off. Cutting down a few mil again, making sure we can get rid of that. I'm just going to make sure it's even all the way around. Just take your time with this, you don't have to rush it at all. So there we go, we got it pretty flat. If you've stuffed your head densely enough, you'll be able to do this with no worries. If it's not dense enough, the stuffing, you'll probably have a really hard time. So we've got that all done. I'm gonna make sure our eye fits in there nicely. So I did actually cut my hole a tiny bit big, but that's alright. So it's the right, well, it's basically the perfect size, but I do tend to like to do them a bit smaller so that it's tight. Alright, so I'll cut the other one and then we're gonna glue them in. Okay, I've got both my eye holes cut out. I do this all the time, so I'm gonna squirt my glue directly into the eye holes. I don't recommend doing this unless you use glue all the time. When it eventually comes out. So I put quite a fair bit to make sure that it gets in all the nook and crannies of the stuffing. I'm going to spread my glue out. So this is fabric glue. You can use PVA glue, but it doesn't really dry as quickly. This is the Helmer brand fabric glue. It's an Australian brand. Making sure my eyes are up straight. Just gonna push it in firmly. Making sure that it's not coming up too high and that I've cut my reservoir down low enough. I also forgot to mention that you don't have to do your eyes like this. You could just stick them on top if you wanted. They will be brokey outy and googly eyes, but if that's what you're into, that's what you're into. You could do button eyes, you could paint them on, you can embroider them, you can do whatever you want. You could even use safety eyes. I've never used safety eyes. There we go, we've got our cat's eyes on. They look pretty even. Yeah. And we're going to wait for them to dry. You want to make sure they're fully dry before you go putting your eyelids on, because you don't want to be moving the position of them. Now what I usually like to do with mine is push the center down a little bit, if I can, so that they face forward instead of facing out, but only the tiniest little bit. Now we have our eyes in. So with my water soluble marker, I'm going to use paintbrush and some water just to dissolve the lines around the eyes and a little bit across here, so that when we put our eyelids on and we felt them in, you're not seeing the blue lines underneath. So we'll do that and then we can put our eyelids on. So if you're doing this, you don't want to get your felt absolutely soaking wet. It does just have to glide along the top. Just gonna make sure we get rid of all that. So now we're going to pin our eyelids on. So you want to make sure you've got your skinnier bit to the center. And we're going to line up the lowest part of the eyelid with the pupil. And you want to try and get it roughly in between, so that this is so hard to explain, so that the edge of the eyelid comes to about halfway between the top and the bottom of the eyelid. So many things to line up with this, it gets a bit hectic. So I'm just putting a pin in where the middle is and putting it in to the gap there, and then we're going to pin it down, spread it out a little bit so that this corner is lining up the gap, because if you have it like this, it's going to be covering your eye. you want it to kind of sit nicely. And the way that they're cut, it's so that it will blend with the top lid. And now when you're doing your second one, you want to make sure that they're lining up here. You might have to stretch it a tiny bit if it's just a mil or so off, so that when you line them up, it's straight with this line here. This one might have to go up a tiny bit. It's a bit better, not perfect. I might have cut it a bit wonky. Whoop. And then same with the other side. You want this distance here to this line to be about the same. So that one is a bit longer. Well, it's not too bad. Tortoise. So now we're going to felt the eyelids in. And I'm just going to go doing little bits around the whole thing so that it's held in place. And making sure you're not getting too close that you're going on the glass, you're just going around the outside. I'm just going to do both so this one's held down while I'm working on the other side and it's not moving too much. Okay. So what I like to do after I've just got it anchored on is start at the bottom, take my pin out, and I just really work on one spot until it's pretty much done, starting to blend out the edge, and then move up to the next pin. And then once I've done that the whole way up, I go from the middle again and up to the top. And then once you've done the whole thing, blending it, the edges out. With the insides of your eyelids, I just trim off the very corner. So with our top eyelid, you can pretty much do it however much you want. If you want it to be really expressive or just kind of normal. As long as you've got this bit covered and it's not with it leaving a big gap, and you haven't got a big gap at the back. I usually like mine to overlap a decent amount so that the top of the eyelid is just touching the pupil, or lining up with the pupil. It probably looks a little bit weird when you just got your eyes and not your eyelids in. And then same as before, we're just going to roughly go around and you want to make sure your pins are really in too, because if they're not, it's going to move around when you start to felt it. And being really careful not to hit the glass either. That's why I include 2 felting needles in the kit, just in case one breaks, because if it's going to break, it's going to be when you're doing this. Picking the pins out, and just the same as before, working on one area and blending it into the others. With the corners, I do tend to blend them in a little bit, but not overly too much, because you don't want it to fall apart. You don't want that to lose that structural integrity. So when your eyes all blended in, it's all on, you can actually change the shape of your eyelids, like how this one's got a bit of a, I don't even know how to explain it, it's got a little bit of a bulge there. I'm very gently just going to push the eyelid down into the crevice between the felt and the glass, and it's just pulled it down, and this bit's drooping down a little bit more than what I like, so I'm just going to do the same thing at the top. And it just opens that eye up a little bit. It is very tricky to do though. Yeah, and I'm just going to finish off the other eye, and then it's time to map out the face. So now we're up to doing the mouth, and I've got my little mouth guide here, and we're going to make sure that this center line lines up with the center line on the face, And we're going to make sure that we've got enough room in between the eyes and the mouth so that you can do your core wool felting and then put a layer of felt over, and it's not going to be interfering with the eyes too much. So make sure it's all lined up. You can pin it if you want. I'm just going to hold it firmly and leaving probably about 4 or 5 millimeters. You can move it down a bit if you want. We're going to trace around. So if you're wanting to do a bit of a chin or anything here at the bottom, you can add that in. If you're wanting to make it a little bit smaller, you can do that. You can make the nose up higher if you wanted. Whatever you want to adjust. I've got my core wool here ready to felt the mouth. I take a little bit about this and I fold it over. You can do this however you like. I'm just showing you how I like to do it. And I'll pop it on the main center bit of the mouth. Just get that center line down. Making sure you stay in the lines. And just kind of getting it, laying it down there. And then you literally just keep doing that until you've got it the size that you want. Just make sure not to do it too big because you want to make sure you've got enough room to put your felt overlay. So always make it a little bit smaller than what you want, then you can lay your felt over the top and see what it's going to be like. So I've got my main shape for the mouth all done, but what I like to do is needle felt a little trough down the center up here to where the nose is going to be, so that you can put your threading in with a defined line. Just a little bit. Can you see there how it's more going down the center there? So then your threading can sit in there without it going where you don't want it to be. So we've got that bit. Now, if you're doing a dog, I'm just going to show roughly on here while you can see it. I'd leave a little hollow just there. I'd leave a hollow. And then I would felt a little bit here with this core wool just there so that the tongue can sit on top of it, and that can be your little chin. And this is what I do for my cats with an open mouth as well. I'll show you how to do an open mouth in a different tutorial so that it's not getting too confusing on here. But today I'm just going to do a chin with a closed mouth on this cat, and on the dog I'll show you how to do the tongue. But we're just going to do a little chin here today, and then we're just going to put the sheet felt over the top of it. So using my core wool again, I'm not going to use very much. Just get it in a little ball, and I'm not going to make it as high as the rest. I'm trying to keep it away, not blending it into the rest of the mouth, because you want that threading to be able to sit through there still. Might actually need to trim it back a bit. Just add a tiny bit more so it's still got a bit of shape. Alrighty, that'll do. And then we'll grab our sheet wool and lay it over the top. Okay, so we're ready to put on our sheet felt. And I've got my bit here. We're going to use our mouth guide again, but we're going to cut it quite a bit larger because now that your mouth has shape, it's going to be bigger than what the original outline was. And we also want to include that extra few mil from around the edge, taking into account that we've got the chin as well, so it kind of comes out like that. And we'll see if that fits. So we're placing it on, and it's covering all of the mouth and the bottom. I've done a bit of a weird shape, but anyway. So with this Siamese cat, I am going to do a bit of a fill in here as well. So I'm not too bothered about what shape this is going to be in the end. If your face is going to be the same color as your mouth and your eyes and everything, you don't have to worry about it too much either, the shape that it is, if it's going to be a bit jagged, because you can just blend it in. This bit is a bit big, so I'll trim that off. And I do not recommend doing any trimming until you know exactly if it's going to fit. So the chin there, you can see it is only just covering it, so that should be okay. And then starting in the center, we're needle felting, and I do just randomly do little bits over the whole thing first, but I mainly try and focus on the center, and then moving out to the edges. I don't really want that over the eyelid. Okay, 1, And then as you're doing this too, you'll be able to start seeing where you've got your creases. You'll be able to feel it as well, where you've got empty space. And that's where you really want to lay down those lines as well. So I've got my felt down now, but as you can see, this side's a bit higher than this side. If you wanted to, you could fill this out a little bit more. So what I would do is just take my little scraps. I don't use my felting needle, I'll use a very thick doll making needle, and I'll pull little fibers of the felt out. Sometimes I can also do it with my nails. And that also works if you've got anywhere that's come up short, like here is a little bit short. So get my little bits of felt. And it's not doing anything structural, it's just a little bit of a cosmetic fill-in that you can do to blend the edges. If I had more, I'd be able to fill it in a little bit more, but I'm not too bothered because I'm going to do a lot more on this face. But it works enough to just blend it in a bit. If that's excess, use your tiny scissors and gently trim it off and then blend it out. If it's too big, pushing it back into the mouth will help to pull it back that way a little bit. But like I said, I'm going to do a bit more of a felting thing here, so I'm not worried about that. And we're going to thread the nose in now, and I want the nose to be here. Alrighty, we're going to thread the nose in, and we're going to embroider it there, and then we're going to do the ears and sew the head on, and it's done! That's it for part 3. How are you going? Are you still keeping up? I hope I'm breaking everything down really nicely for you, but not too much that it's getting boring. Make sure you follow the links through and watch part 4 if you're making your doll. Don't forget to leave any questions, comments or suggestions in the comment section below. Leave us a like and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!